The Torah portion of Re'eh begins with and is named Re'eh, the very first word. Re'eh literally means see. And this contrasts with the word that the Torah uses most often, which is Shema, as in Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel. And many other places, Moses speaks to the Jewish people, introducing what he has to say to them with the words Shema, hear, listen, reflect, understand, gather all your thoughts together. These are all different translations and nuances in the word Shema. But here, Moses uses the word Re'eh because there's an advantage to seeing over hearing. Seeing is believing, the saying goes. When you see something, even though your perception of it could be wrong, in your mind, it is reality. When you hear something, it's very easily argued upon, but maybe what you heard was not right. Someone tells you something that sounds fantastic, and you say, well, you know what, I'm not so sure it happened. But if you see it with your own eyes, you won't challenge it. And Moses was trying to educate the Jewish people on two levels. He wanted them to hear, to listen, to absorb, and he also wanted them to reach a higher level of re'iyah, of seeing, of being able to visualize all the things that God was telling the people. It says when Mashiach will come, Mashiach will teach Torah to the entire Jewish people. How will he teach Torah in ways that are different from the ways we learn Torah now? So one of the differences is that he will teach Torah in a visual way, as opposed to the audio way that we now learn Torah. Audio has its limits. As I mentioned before, it's not always as convincing. It doesn't penetrate as deeply as when you see something with your own eyes. But also when you see something, you could see so much more. You look at a beautiful piece of art, some major artist, and you look at it for 5 minutes, and you're a connoisseur of art, you're an expert, you're a student of art, you could then lecture on it for hours and hours, maybe days and days. But you only saw it for 5 minutes. But in those 5 minutes, you captured a panoramic view of the subject, and what is still needed is for you to take it apart and express the different details, the components that make up that picture, and what each color, each hue, and each aspect of the picture has a certain message. Mashiach will therefore teach Torah in such a manner where he'll reveal tremendous amount of knowledge, a panoramic view of all this knowledge, and then we'll have to unpack it detail by detail. There's a story told, the great Arizal, the great Kabbalist, one of the greatest, if not the greatest Kabbalist of all times, who passed away 452 years ago. One Shabbos afternoon, he took a nap. When he got up after an hour or two of sleeping, he said what he saw in his sleep, in his vision, when he was asleep, would take him 80 years to unpack if he had to explain everything that he saw there. Just 1 or 2 hours. So even the greatest person, if it's a matter of audio, you can only hear one thing at a time. But visual, you can see a lot of things all coming together as one. And that's how Mashiach will teach Torah. Moses wanted to instill that power of visualizing into the Jewish people before they entered into the Promised Land. Then the Torah says, see, I present before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, that you hearken to the commandments of God your God, that I command you today. And the curse, if you do not hearken to the commandments of God your God, and you stray from the path that I command you today, to follow gods of others that you did not know. And then it goes on to talk about how there will be punishment for people who don't follow in God's ways. So the question asked by commentators is that when it comes to the blessing, it doesn't say if you will listen to God's commandments. It says that you hearken to the commandments of God your God. Not if you will follow the commandments. And the curse is if you do not hearken, not that you will not hearken. So there are at least two ways of explaining this. One way of explaining it is that we have to really discuss what is closer to our heart, doing good or doing evil. Now we have free choice. God gives us the ability to choose to do the right things or to do the wrong things, to do good or to do evil. The question is, which is more natural? Many people would say, and there are religions that believe in original sin, that humanity is essentially and inherently a sinner, has a sinful character, and cannot be saved except through some extraordinary divine salvation. That's not Judaism. Judaism does not believe in original sin. Judaism believes that humanity is essentially good and positive, that underlying all the negativity, which could be very strong and very deep, there's a deeper and more fundamental aspect of your being that identifies with doing the right thing. So therefore the Torah says, when it comes to doing the right thing, that identifies you, who you are, the blessing, that you hearken to God, to the commandments of God. That means not if you will do it. Eventually you will do it. It's just a question of how long will it take before you recognize who you really are. There's many stories told. A story told about the people of Heschel, where he was afraid that if he goes to the bathhouse, he won't be able to identify himself because he wouldn't be wearing clothing. So he put a red ribbon around his toe, knowing, well, now I know who I am. And while he was showering, the red ribbon unraveled and it tied itself around the toe of someone else. So the guy from Heschel tells the other person, I know who you are, but who am I? We have that existential doubt about who we really are. But the Torah tells us who we really are. We are people whose very essence is to do what God wants us to do, except for the fact that there is a superimposed negative inclination that tells us to do things that are contrary to God's will. But our essence, our identity is the mitzvah. That is who we are. And therefore, when it comes to doing the curse, it says, we have free choice. It could happen that we go against our essential nature, but our essential nature will eventually come to fruition. It'll come to the fore, even though it's maybe deeply embedded in us and it's hard to experience that fundamental holiness and godliness in us. It's there and it will eventually come to the fore. When Mashiach comes, everyone will experience that. So why delay? Why wait and postpone doing the right thing? Because that's who we really are. That's one explanation why it doesn't use the word if when it comes to doing a mitzvah. That you will do it, not if you will do it. Whereas the sin, it says if you will do it. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, the famous Hasidic master, gives another explanation. And he says that when the Torah promises a reward, most rewards, the Talmud tells us, does not come to fruition, does not materialize in this world. Most rewards are reserved for the world to come. Sometimes we get reward in this world, but there's one reward that we get in this world that is worth more than all the rewards of the next world. And what is that? The reward of a mitzvah, our sages tell us, is the mitzvah itself. Imagine a person realizing that he is able to or she is able to do something that makes God feel good, that brings joy to God, that brings satisfaction to someone who we love so deeply and so fundamentally. That's the greatest reward. We don't need to look for another reward. Sure, there are other rewards, and we're not going to turn them away. If God gives us wealth, He gives us health, He gives us prosperity, He gives us all the good things in this world and in the next world. That's all beautiful and fine. But what is the reward? The reward is that you will listen. That's why He says the blessing. What is the blessing? He's not saying the blessing is contingent on doing the right thing. That's a separate issue. The blessing is that you will hearken to the commandments of God, your God. That is the greatest blessing. When a person does the right thing, the greatest blessing is that he did the right thing. and brought joy and satisfaction to his Creator. I'm going to skip over to a verse much later in the Parsha, and this is what the verse says. If there shall be a destitute person among you, one of your brethren, in any of your cities, in the land that God, your God, gives you, you shall not harden your heart or close your hand against your destitute brother. Rather, you shall open your hand to him. You shall lend him his requirement, whatever is lacking to him. So the simple meaning of this verse is obvious, is self-evident, that God is telling us to give charity, whether it's a handout or whether it's a loan. When we see someone who's destitute, we have to help. The famous Hasidic, Sephardic, I should say, but I said Hasidic, that's a Freudian slip because he was very close to the hearts of Hasidim in particular. Much of what Hasidic philosophy teaches is paralleled in the writings of the Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, who passed away around the year 1750. I'm not sure of the exact year. And he lived in Morocco, then he moved to Israel, and he wrote a classic commentary on the Torah called Or HaChaim, the light of life. And one of the themes that he had, a thing that comes up many times in his commentary, is the theme of Mashiach. And this is how he explains this verse that talks about the poor person. And he says, this destitute person among you, who's one of your brethren, that refers allegorically to Mashiach. Mashiach is one. He's one and only, a singularly important person in our nation, for whom we hope and await for the day he will arrive. So Mashiach here is described as a destitute person, and he's destitute, it says, because one of your brethren, and he's among you. So the Or HaChaim says he's destitute because of you, because of what we do to delay the coming of Mashiach through our transgressions. So he's broken and destitute because of us, and his whole being is directed towards us. He's obsessed with us. He wants more than anything else to bring Mashiach, in other words, to be given the instruction to lead the world into the age of the final redemption. That's what he wants more than anything else. And that's why is he called a poor man? So the Or HaChaim refers to the verse in the book of Zechariah, that's the biblical book of Zechariah, where Mashiach is described as a poor man riding on a donkey, which means that Mashiach is someone who is humble. Poor, the Hebrew word for poor there, ani, also has the connotation of someone who is humble, who is impoverished. Now, why is he called humble? That we understand. He is a humble person. But the Or HaChaim is referring here to Evyon. Evyon is another word for poor, and actually in Hebrew, although Hebrew is a very limited language in terms of the words that it has, there are just a few thousand words, unlike English, which has maybe 1 million words, but there are 10 words for poor. There are also 10 words for joy, and a few other things that have many words, but it's limited how many synonyms there are. But one of the synonyms for poor is ani. That's the word used in the book of Zechariah, a poor man, humbly poor. And then there is Evyon. Now, of all these 10 words, we're not going to go through all 10, the one that is the most poor and the most wanting is the Evyon. The word Evyon, our sages tell us, is someone who is ta'ev l'chol davar. He desires everything. He craves everything. Why does he crave everything? Because he has nothing. Most people crave certain things, but they have a lot of other things. You could be rich financially, but poor in knowledge, so you crave knowledge. But someone who has nothing, and that begs a question. If you say Mashiach is ani, he's humble, we understand. If you say he's lacking something, what is he lacking is a question, but you can say someone is lacking something. But to say that he's lacking everything, of all people, Of all people, Mashiach should be the one who's described as someone who's lacking everything. That means he's lacking material things. He's lacking spiritual things as well. How could you apply that appellation to Mashiach, who's going to be the greatest human being that ever lived, surpassing even Moses? So how could we call him an Evyon? So the answer is, and it's hinted in the words of the Or HaChaim, that Mashiach wants nothing less than to take the Jewish people and ultimately the whole world out of Golus, out of exile. He craves it more than anything else. He's totally devastated. Whatever he has, to him, doesn't mean anything unless he can complete the job. And you see, there are two kinds of leaders, and Mashiach is the second kind on steroids. What are the two kinds of leaders? There's a leader who has a life's mission. I have to accomplish, and every human being has that. I have to accomplish so much and so much. With my talents, I'm expected to accomplish certain things. And when I fulfill my mission and I accomplish whatever I accomplished, I could leave this world and be content. I fulfilled my mission. Most people don't. A person who has fulfilled his mission, especially if you surpassed it even a little bit, you're thrilled. You did everything right. Now, that's the one kind of leader who has a mission, fulfills it, and is satisfied, even if his mission didn't change the whole world. You know, you're a leader in one community and you did everything right for that community, but you didn't do anything for the next community. You saved the people in Buffalo, but you didn't save the people in Rochester. But you were only expected to save the people in Buffalo. You were not expected to save the people in Rochester. You were expected to do one city, because our talents are limited. We're finite human beings, and we have our limits. So we did as much as we can do, considering our capabilities, and we fulfilled our mission. Great, that's wonderful. The second kind of leader says, I don't feel comfortable with my achievements because I didn't finish the job. Yes, I did everything that was expected of me, but my responsibility is not just for one particular area, it's for the entire world. Now, there's no one really who could put himself in that position where he says, I have to save the whole world. No one human being can say that, with one exception, with one notable exception, Mashiach. Mashiach is someone who is charged with the responsibility to bring salvation to the whole world. And how does he do that? By inspiring people to the point where people are worthy of the final redemption, and he ushers in the final redemption. Of course, he doesn't do it on his own. It's God's power that God is vested in him, but he has to do the utmost. If he doesn't bring the redemption, even though he achieved tremendous things, more than any other human being in history, he feels that he is a failure. And he's shattered and broken and devastating. The Talmud tells a story, a powerful story. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, one of the greatest sages of his time, was a very holy man, and he used to be together with Elijah the prophet, would come to visit him. And he asked Elijah the prophet, when is Mashiach coming? He says, why don't you ask Mashiach himself? Where is he? He's at the gates of Rome. And he's together with sitting with all the lepers. How will I know which one is Mashiach? Obviously, he's in this disguise. Well, you'll know the one who's Mashiach because all the lepers have many wounds, and they remove the bandages of all the wounds and put on a new dressing for all the wounds. So it takes them time to remove the bandages for each of the many wounds that they have. There's one poor man there, one leper there, who only removes one bandage at a time. Why? Because if he's given the signal that it's time for him to bring the final redemption, he doesn't want to wait till he removes all the bandages and rebandages himself. In other words, what he's trying to say is that Mashiach is someone who can't even wait 5 minutes if he's told it's time for him to come and usher in the final redemption. He can't say, you know what, I'm busy now. In 5 minutes I'll come. Those 5 minutes are torture because Mashiach is so devoted to the Jewish people and to the whole world for that matter that he can't bear the suffering one single second. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Koheles, he refers to the word vanity, hevel, 7 times. What do the 7 times correspond to? So Rashi quotes the Midrash. It corresponds to the 7 days of the week, that everything is hevel compared to what will happen in the days of Mashiach. Everything is vanity, is emptiness. It has no value. So the question is, what do you mean it has no value? What about Shabbos? Shabbos is one of the 7 days. Does Shabbos have no value? And the answer is, of course, Shabbos has value. But when you're dealing with someone who's focused on the ultimate future, when the whole world will be basking in the Shabbos, when the whole world will have a perpetual Shabbos, and right now we don't have that, that compared relative to what we will have in the future is called hevel. It's vanity. It has no substance to it. And this explains what the Rebbe, in a historic talk, which he said with tremendous pain, he said that everything that he sought to accomplish was lehevel, was vanity, was emptiness, was useless. I failed. In other words, it seems that the Rebbe was saying, but yet the Rebbe accomplished more than any other Jewish leader in who knows how many centuries. But by the Rebbe, if he couldn't bring Mashiach, that means that he failed. Now, of course, we have to recognize that relative to our level, the Rebbe's accomplishments are monumental. But the Rebbe wanted us to feel that we are the Evyon, we are the poor person who craves everything because nothing has any meaning, because everything will be so much better when Mashiach comes, and therefore he craves everything. You know, it's interesting, on Purim it says you're supposed to give help, assistance to the poor. The word poor that's used in regard to Purim is Evyon. Evyon. So the Rebbe says, who is the Evyon today? Which poor people do we know that really have nothing and they crave everything? And the Rebbe said prisoners. And that's why the Rebbe launched a whole massive campaign to this day of visiting prisoners, especially on Purim, and giving them a little bit of joy, a little bit of the spirit of Purim. What the Rebbe was trying to say is that a prisoner has nothing material, nothing spiritual, because he's locked up. His whole life is on hold. Well, we are, in a certain sense, in a prison. That's what Golus is. That's what exile is. It's a prison. Our abilities are limited, and besides all the pain and suffering and the wars and the hatred and all the negative things, but even without the negative things, there's so many limits placed on us because we're in exile. So we're in prison. So we are the ultimate Evyon. We are, like Mashiach, we are the ultimate poor person, and we need to awaken the poor person, the Mashiach within us, that will take us out of exile.